My guest today is a globally recognized businesswoman, entrepreneur, philanthropist, public servant, Baroness Martha Lane Fox. At 25, she co-founded one of the very first internet startups, lastminute.com, which has been Europe's first online retail travel retailer. In 2009, she was appointed digital champion for the UK and has since become a widely respected proponent for the responsible use of technology. As director of Peers to the Planet, she's also a driving force behind putting the need for an urgent response to climate change and biodiversity at the top of the political agenda in the UK. And she's got many other hats that we hopefully have a chance to discuss a bit. So Baroness Martha Lane Fox, Martha, a very warm welcome to the Positive Leadership Podcast.
Thank you so much.
So, Martha, you come from an academic background with your parents. Your father, Robin, is a classical historian and one of the world's leading experts on Alexander the Great. So, to what extent have you been influenced by his curiosity, his energy? In many ways, how did your parents, I mean your mom as well, and maybe grandparents, shape the values that you hold today?
It's a difficult question to answer about oneself, isn't it? About where that genesis of you comes from and the heritage that you have also emerged out of. But I really have such a deep respect for both my parents and the world they built for us, but also the world that they lived in themselves. You know, my dad is now 76 just last week and never stops. He sent me a picture yesterday of him on a horse riding down the Appian Way into Rome, and he said, "Look, I'm riding the Roman syllabus." So he has got such a zest for life. It's quite remarkable, and he never made me feel, especially as a young woman, young girl, that my brain was any less valid than anybody else's. We would have debates, challenges, complex arguments at the dinner table, and he has an incredible curiosity for everything in the world, quite literally. I don't use that term literally, is overused, but not in this context. So a huge influence on me. My mum as well, you know, always worked. She started a business with her best friend, an entrepreneur herself, a very compassionate woman. So I hope the best of me is the best of them, and the worst of me I claim as my own.
Well, what a great start. What a great start to understand who shaped you and who had been influencing, of course, who you are today, among many other, I'm sure, many other events in your life as well, Martha. You know, a few months back, I was talking to Aina Uffington on the podcast, and one of the key takeaways we had from the conversation was that fundamental system change begins actually with each one of us and our individual power to change the world and our capacity. But you need to feel secure in your power, and that takes, I think, a certain degree of self-confidence, self-esteem. And so in the late 90s, when you set up lastminute.com, there were lots of people who were questioning even the concept of shopping on the internet, right? If that would even take off. And how a female entrepreneur on top of that could pull it off. So how hard was it for you to get people to invest behind the idea? And at the time, again, you were only 25, and when you might, I guess, have felt what is being called today the imposter syndrome.
Do you know what? I think imposter syndrome has got worse through my life. I'm 50 next year, and I feel much more of an imposter now than I did at age 25. Yes, we can come back to that. We can put a pin in that.
Yeah.
You know, lastminute.com was an incredible experience. I am so lucky to have met Brent Hoberman, my co-founder, and all power to Brent and credit to him. It was his idea, lastminute.com, and he very generously asked me to do it with him and split the idea with me. And I think that part of confidence came from that very strong friendship and partnership. We were both young, but just I think when you have that belief in your idea, you would have been customers of what you're trying to build, and you have that excitement about it. The confidence is sort of secondary in a way, because you're so sure that this is something that people would want to use because you would use it. And so you're your first customers. So I think being 25 was actually a benefit at that point, because you don't know very much, you don't know anything. You're just sort of blindly carrying on. And I think the pair of us together, we reinforced each other and supported each other, and he was an incredible friend and co-founder have had. But you're right, you know, it was a crazy ride. And in 1998, when we finally finished the business plan and went out to raise money, there really were hardly any investors in Europe, let alone in London, just one small city, big but small city, that were interested in e-commerce ideas. When I told my friends what I was doing, they would look at me blankly, think I was completely nuts and walk away from me.
Yeah.
And that was kind of characteristic of what we found some of the investment community did as well. We sent our business plan to everybody. We sent it to everybody we knew was investing in internet companies, everybody that we knew was an investor. 99.9% of those people said no thank you very much. And the few people that did even ask to see us were extremely skeptical, gave us a real grilling, and most of them said no. So it was hard to raise the money, and it was really only by chance, because of a whole series of events, that we ended up in front of an investor that did take that original gamble with us. But we had some crazy meetings on the way, one of which I'll just recount, where we went to see a very, very old-fashioned venture capitalist. We walked into his office, you know, I've got a streak of pink in my hair and I was 25, I looked ridiculous, and he was sitting behind a big mahogany desk at the end of his office, very grand, you know, very wooden, all this stuff. And he looked at our business plan like this, looked at his glasses like that, turned the pages over, just said, I have one question. And Brent and I were like, hooray, what's it going to be about? You know, we prepared every scenario about the travel margins. Was it about the cost to roll out internationally? What was it going to be? And he looked at Brent and he said, what happens if she gets pregnant?
Wow.
It was unbelievable.
Wow.
It was unbelievable.
So how did you respond? How did you respond to that?
I'm not often silenced, as maybe you can tell, but I was totally silenced and flummoxed. And Brent looked at me just like, why is he asking this to me? Looked at me. And I said, well, I guess I'll have a baby. I mean, it was so ridiculous.
Wow.
But it does show you, and I hope those questions are much more rare now, but I fear they may still be in people's minds, even if they're not spoken out loud. So, yes, quite a lot of things you can unpick from that.
Yeah, that's quite amazing. I mean, it sounds like almost another century. Actually, it was 1988.
It was another century, yes. You can tell from this face.
When you think about how the world has come, and the investment community in the UK in particular, which has been incredibly stimulating for all the startups community. So lastminute.com, Martha, was one of the first e-commerce companies in the UK. And as you said, you know, in some ways, you fitted well the emerging idea of a young entrepreneur that became popular afterwards, right? And so when the dot-com bubble burst happened, you found yourself being singled out and blamed totally unfairly on the stock market crash, of course. And you were on the receiving end, if I understand well, with a lot of very personal hate and messages.
Yes.
So looking back at this very painful moment, what were the key lessons for you from that early roller coaster experience?
Yeah, I mean, that was a brutal moment, but as with everything, you take some things from it. I think, you know, there had been a quid pro quo in this equation, but I think I had not quite understood what the counterpart of it had been. So the upside was that for a period of time when we were building our business, everybody wanted to meet us, talk about us, write about us. It sounds ridiculous, and I don't mean to sound grand, but we became kind of mini business celebrities, right? I would walk down the street and people would say, hi, are you Martha? People even asked for my autograph. You know, I was building an e-commerce startup, but not exactly a pop star. So it was crazy. And I think it just hit the zeitgeist of London having a bit of a generation with Blair government coming in, everybody wanting to seem that there was this emerging technology that we were going to capture. Here were some young people doing something fantastic. Here was a woman in technology. All of these things just fitted a set of criteria that newspapers and media wanted to exploit. And that was phenomenal. And there is absolutely no doubt we built that brand so much more cheaply than we had expected, because we got this massive burst of PR. The flip side of that, of course, was that then we became the... sorry, my cat has strong views on this, if you can hear, I apologise. We became the... we just became the boxing bag, really, when things went a bit more complicated and challenging. And, you know, some of that is fair. You know, we floated our company at a very high stock price, £5.35, and the stock market crashed and it went down to 19p and people were cross. And I get it, right? So I understand. But I think where it was tough was that it became very directed at me personally, and it's very hard not to look back on that and think there was misogyny and just, again, this latent, very old-fashioned way of treating young women. And I was still only 28, 29 at that point. Often, Brent would be cut out of the photographs about the business, and yet here we were building it together. So that was hard. And I think, on reflection, to finally get to the answer of your question, I think about two things from that. I think, firstly, about, you know, the immense power, actually, the positivity of being able to follow the zeitgeist. You know, I've heard Eric Schmidt talk on many occasions about follow the puck, you know, a nice hockey analogy. If you can be in the direction that the puck is traveling, you can go at warp speed. And we did that. And that is advice, I think, that is extremely valuable for any startup to try and get into that sweet spot of where people are looking. And the second thing is, you know, much more personal. And I think when you're an entrepreneur, you don't have a traditional set of bosses. Clearly, you're the boss, and you can be who you want to be. You can be yourself, which is an extremely rewarding and wonderful thing to be. But you can also mean that you give too much of yourself. And I think when I look back, I wish I'd just contained myself a bit more. I wish that I had not thought I don't have to be completely out there. I can be out there, but keep a bit back. And then you can retreat to the bit that you've kept back when things get a bit more tough.
Yeah. And so I assume this is the way you've started building some resiliency in the way you've been confronted with many other challenges in your life, Martha, at the time. Did you reflect on that at the time? Probably not, because you are still young, or did you start changing some of your habits or ways of behaving with people or trusting people? And
I hope I didn't stop on trusting people, but I definitely learned some lessons about just, you know, I feel as though it was really then that I saw much more clearly how the world still unfortunately worked. You know, the loop between media investment, the underlying, you know, as I say, quite deep levels of sexism that women still face, and I think still face today. And, you know, I don't say that moaning or complaining. It was just a bit of a wake-up call. And I was lucky, you know, I had an incredibly good friend and strong man by my side in Brent as my co-founder, and he was remarkable and supported through that time. But I think it did make me see the world slightly differently from this kind of rosy picture. And I don't think it changed my trust levels, but it definitely changed some of the things that I wanted to do. It made me more aware about women in technology wanting to be a bit more of a voice for them as much as for kind of entrepreneurship. And I think the second thing is, as I say, I think it definitely taught me about how much you have to bring, you know, the expression now, bring your full self to work, you know, be your authentic self. I think that's sort of right, but I don't buy it totally. I think you can bring your work to work, do your work, right? If you want to bring yourself, that's great. But I think it's also fine to just do your work. And I think that might be a slightly countercultural view right now. But I think it's okay to have these different spaces. It's okay to have a work you and a personal you. And I think that's what I take from that too.
Excellent, because you're right. It's something that today seems to be a lot more accepted, to bring yourself authentic, as we just discussed. But you are more nuanced in a way you need to do that, and because, well, you get some scars, I guess, from from that time. A few years after that, Martha, you went through another crucible of your life. I mean, this is the term used by Bill George, my podcast, you know, crucibles of your life. And you had this terrible accident in Morocco where you are left fighting for your life. In a car accident, I think you broke 28 bones, including your pelvis. You suffered a stroke, and you were told that you would probably never walk again. And so those early days of recovery, I'm sure, have been extremely dark. So what pulled you through? Which hidden resources did you find in yourself to bounce back and reset Martha, the new Martha?
Reset. I'm not sure it was new and improved, but just but new maybe. You know, I think, again, it goes back to just some simple fundamentals, and sounds, again, a bit platitudinous or somewhat overly sentimental, but I was surrounded with so much love from my friends, from my family, from my partner, Chris. You know, I never felt alone in this. I felt like I was working in a team to rebuild myself, and I will never ever be able to repay that debt to my friends and my family. You know, my mother was completely extraordinary when she was going through a very dark time herself, thinking I might die, but she was there with me every step of the way, as was my partner Chris. And my friends just were astonishing. You know, they came and broadcast movies on my hospital ceiling. They slept under my bed. They brought their new babies to put in my, you know, weird bed that I was in because of my pelvis. They came to see me every day. There was not one day when I didn't have visitors. One friend sent me a postcard every single day for the 2 years I was in hospital. You know, these are things that give you fight, because you don't feel as though you're just in a vacuum. You feel like you're surrounded. So those are the things. I think nearly 20 years on from that, when my life has been so dramatically changed and is so permanently changed. You know, I've just spent nearly 12 months battling with a very complex hip issue and bone infection, in and out of hospital again. Actually, it's much more complex now, just living life and being resilient.
Yes.
Because, you know, that early 2 years where you're learning to do things, you've got constant small goals, you're learning to stand up, you're learning to eat again, all those things. That's such a structured process and program. When life then sort of, you merge from that and you get used to the choppiness of a new life, dealing with pain, dealing with continence, dealing with hospitals, dealing with all these things. That's, I think, when it's the secondary part of it that's harder, because then you have to get used to a different normal where there aren't the same supports around every single minute in that kind of crisis mode.
It's actually very insightful what you just said. I mean, you talk about who really helped you, what helped you to not just survive, but to actually go through that. And you said it's love.
Yeah.
The people who matter the most in your life, the people who love you. And it reminds me of a discussion I had with a French philanthropist, entrepreneur called Clara Guémard, who you may know or not.
I don't.
Okay, Clara used to be the head of French Invest Agency, so representing France.
Yeah.
But she's been also working at GE. I know she's an investment fund, and she's also investing into philanthropy. Anyway, and so we are doing that in French, of course, because she's French as well. And at one point, she said, you know, the most important thing when my life went dark was to think about what would love do at the time. And that has become a mantra. And actually, even her daughter offered her a ring where they engraved actually what would love do, just to remind herself in those tough moments in our lives, hey, those people love us. That's what matters the most.
That's funny, actually, just because my mother's name is Louisa, and my friends have a joke. They say, WWLD, what would Louisa do? Which is the same as what would love do, right? Because she's always so smart in situations. So the WWLD is something that we always refer to.
So wonderful. So now talking about more of the day-to-day, in a way you build your energy. I mean, I can feel even through these team conversations, Martha, and we discussed before together as well, you propagate a lot of positive energy in the things you say, in the way you say things. How do you do that? I mean, do you have some practical techniques, physical, mental, cognitive, that you've developed day after day that you do during your days?
Well, the first thing is I do a lot of exercise, right? I start my most days. I know, again, everybody says these same things, but that's because it works. It really does.
It works, exactly.
Especially when you're very broken like me. You know, I feel like the difference between a day where I'm sort of contained and I can't move or walk or do nice, not very good strength exercises because I'm not that brilliant compared to most people, but I'm getting better. So that is a fundamental piece of everything, right? And I think if I feel as though I'm and I feel physically like I'm achieving something, that's a starting point for me. But then the second thing, and this is where I am so super lucky in my working life and my life, is feeling as though there is some purpose to some of the things you do and enjoying the people that you work with. So, you know, a day where I'm lucky enough to meet interesting people like you, or have conversations with some of the across the different topics that I cover, that gives you energy, because
that's a good day.
You're always, but also you're always on the back foot, and I mean it in a good way, right? I don't ever feel I know anything. I am constantly learning, and that's one of the joys of not really having a very proper job that can describe as your intro. I sound like a right plonker in your intro because I've got all these different things. I sound like I'm trying to be a bit grand, but the truth of it is, I know nothing. I'm learning all the time, and that gives you energy because you're constantly feeling like, oh, that's this, and so I think that's also part of it. So those are, I think, the two things that I'm lucky enough in a kind of daily way.
Physical exercise and actually intellectual exercise, learning it all every day from anyone that you're going to meet with. Love it. So we discussed together, Martha, obviously some very challenging moments of your life, but also sometimes failure when lastminute.com had some challenges, obviously. Can you give us another example, I would say, of a failure? I mean, where and all of us fail badly from time to time for whatever reasons. And can you tell us what you learned from that failure? What was it first, and what did you learn of that?
There's there's a lot to pick from.
Just pick one of your favorites.
As you know, because when you do a
Yeah.
lot of different things, particularly, there's a lot of failure. I mean, I think this may sound strange because in some ways it led to positive things, but maybe that's part of the thing. So as you said, I was lucky enough to be appointed the digital champion for the UK in 2009. I
Yes.
worked for two prime ministers, Gordon Brown and then David Cameron, so very different political shades, but actually both united in some things that they shared around the importance of technology and innovation in this country. And one of the things I was tasked with doing was helping all the people in the UK who had never used the internet to get access. Actually, I wasn't really tasked with it, but I weighed in there as something that was very important for making Britain digital. It wasn't just about supporting startups and finding the next me and Brent. It was also about leveling the playing field, getting to that 100% connectivity, and I believe that very, very deeply and passionately. And so I was appointed in 2009, and I thought, well, 2012, that's the Olympics. I'm going to say that I'm going to get everybody in the UK connected by the Olympics. And I went out there with this big ambition. I was like getting corporate partners to give me money. Microsoft was very generous in this. We did a whole bunch of projects and I supported charities and we did a big burst of work, but I got nowhere near getting everybody connected by 2012. It was way, way harder than I had anticipated at the beginning of the journey. And I was definitely guilty of thinking, set the big hairy goal, doing the classic entrepreneurial thing, like big vision, and then failing miserably against it. And in a way, I wish I'd approached that differently. I wish I'd approached it more bottom up. I wish I'd listened a bit more to some of the communities that have been doing this work for ages and people that needed to be helped and hadn't set such a big target that was never going to be met. And I'm not sure if it set people back, but I definitely don't think it moved things as much forward as I would like.
No, it's a great example. Obviously, I can relate to it, being myself, living in the tech industry for 40 years of my life, and being very passionate about technology, being used as well for the common good. Actually, I think there's so much more that can be done there. But in a way, the lesson you kind of share with us, Martha, is when you have such big, bold, ambitious goals, hairy goals, we call them, right? Yeah. Make sure you start with the base. Make sure you start with the people who actually are living the problem, I guess, every day, who can actually teach you a lesson first on what is the problem you're trying to solve. Yeah. And probably get them involved as well, right? To find the most appropriate ways to find the social innovation or tech solution to get where you need to go. Yeah. So based on that, because I know you stay actually very close to that cause today, if you had another call from your new leader in the UK, I'm not going to talk politics, no worries, but about...
Oh my God, I don't know what I would do if I got that call. No. There'd be many things I want to talk about. Let's leave it at that.
But how would you again approach the challenge very differently beyond doing what you just said, right? I mean, in the context of 2022 today.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is I thought I was being pretty urgent back in 2009, but I would put even more urgency around it now. I think I would deploy much more, maybe seen as traditional, but noisy kind of PR tactics to use rallying cry to say this is unacceptable. I chaired a House of Lords committee looking at the long-term implications of COVID, and one of the things that came out so strongly from it wasn't just about digital stuff, but that permeated everything, as you can imagine. And the fact that there are still so many millions of homes and children without access to technology. I mean, imagine being in the pandemic, unable to use or afford the internet. Unbearable. We met mothers who said they were making the choice between feeding their kids and letting them have access to do their homework. I mean, and this is one of the richest countries in the world. So that's the first thing. I would put even more urgency behind it, because it is absolutely horrific to me that we are still in this situation. And I think the second thing is, I think we know what needs to be done. There are community organizations, there are charities, there are groups that are connecting very vulnerable groups of people every day. We need to just ramp up their resources dramatically. So I would say to the government, just put the money in. It's not complicated, actually. Give it to the experts. Don't give it to me. Give whatever it costs. I think we sized that it would cost about $1 billion to finish the job, but give it to the community organizations that are doing the work. And
we know how to do the job,
exactly.
Exciting. And building on that, I mean, obviously, this is one of the causes that you are very passionate about. I think there's another cause we discussed together before, which is a big one. It's not about digital equity, although I would say it probably connects to it. It's really kind of the skills, jobs, equity. Yeah. In 2014, you were appointed Chancellor of the Open University, which offers flexible part-time study, support distance, and open learning for undergrad and postgraduate courses and qualifications. And I think you told me last time we discussed together, Martha, it's one of your most rewarding, inspiring roles. So why is that? Tell us where you find that energy from that project and what's going to drive you next with that project.
Well, the Open University is a phenomenal organisation. It was set up in the late 60s by Harold Wilson, the Prime Minister here in the UK. If people don't know what it is, the premise is that anybody can study. There's no bar to entry. You can study remotely and you can study for as long as you like. So I've given degrees, which is one of the bits of my job that's most fantastic, to people that have been studying for 40 years with the Open University. Because things happen. People die, families break up, whatever the thing is that have prevented them from studying. And so we have now many millions of students that have been through the university since the late 1960s, and an amazing network across the country, and people who've, are working in social work, want to get to the next level, decide to do this extra course while they're working. It's called part-time learning, but I always say to any of the students that I meet, it's not part-time, it's double-time learning, because most of them are in work, or they're carers, or they're doing something alongside their studies. And they come from a different socioeconomic background to where you might find most university graduates in the country. So it's, for me, an incredible structure that was set up here in the UK. And the fact that it had digital, as it was in late 1960s, right at the heart of it, is very appealing, because it really was always set up from the point of view that you don't need a campus, you can work from home, you can use technology to enable it for people's lives. So it's an amazing organisation, and it's really a national treasure. I meet incredible graduates. One of the jobs of Chancellor, I'm not an executive, I'm like a symbolic head like the Queen, and I do degree ceremonies frequently, and they're fantastic, and there's always a lot of noise. I give prizes to different audiences for how loud they can cheer and clap. But the thing that gets me is that you see people's faces as they're coming towards you across the stage where you give them their degree, and they're either terrified because they've got to walk across the stage, or they're crying because this is just such a moment, or their families are going nuts in the audience because often they'll be shouting, "Mum, mum, mum, mum," and that always gets me, because here are women that have brought up 2 children, maybe their husband's died, and they're in work, and they've got a degree. And so that's why it's such a rewarding experience. And again, it's not for me to push the organisation on. As I say, I'm more of the symbolic head, but I know that there's never been a more crucial time for organisation ever. The skills gap you talked about, the need for constant learning, the need to keep encouraging people to be lifelong learners, and the need to make sure that we try and close these hideous inequalities through better education.
Yes, I more than agree with you. I mean, in many ways, Open University, I think, is really trying to build this more inclusive, healthier, equitable, sustainable society to provide an open access to free higher education anywhere in the world, by the way, beyond the boundaries of the UK as well. Yes. Why do you think, and you mentioned some of that already, but I'd love to expand a bit, Martha, why do you think that free lifelong learning is so important to building a more equitable society? And do you think that the connection between tech that we discussed before and digital skills should be considered as human right, actually, in 2022 and beyond? And how do you plan to build a change to make that happen with the Open University?
Well, the Open University is one useful tool, I think, in that toolbox. I mean, for me, 100%, not just access, but understanding the internet to a basic level is a fundamental plank of functioning in this modern society that we live in, right? And I think one of the difficulties is that shifting all the time. What that would have looked like in 1999 is different to what it looks like in 2099. And that's what I think we have to start thinking about, is how we give this constant shifting of skills training, because it's not going to be set, it's going to move on. There are going to be different things you need to understand and be able to use. But from every angle, if you look at things through the tech lens for a moment, we need more skilled tech workers. There's huge gaps in our sectors. And if we don't spread knowledge to more people and out of, the much more closed socio-demographic group that tech workers still tend to come from, we're just not going to be able to fill those jobs. So it's in everybody's interest to try and have a more equitable tech sector, because we'll just have more access to more people.
For sure.
So that's one of the first points. There's also that those jobs are going to be more highly paid, and all of the things that we all know well.
Go with it. Yeah.
So it's just from every angle, putting digital skills at the heart of those skills gaps is essential to me, because every job is digital now. It all has an element of digital, and if we're excluding people because of their access or their understanding, it's a fundamental point of fairness, and we will never reach the inequalities that we want to. And then I think, as you say, organisations like the Open University are going to be extremely important in the mix.
Yes.
But I'm an optimist, but I have to be a bit despairing, because I look now and I think there are some plans. The UN has a track around this issue about digital access and skills, but it's somewhat of a mishmash, in my opinion. Partly infrastructure, partly access, partly skills, partly training, all these things. And if I look at our own country right now, beyond this current political car crash, there is no particular digital vision for the UK. I think we are somewhat delusional that we think we've built a kind of digital superpower. I don't think we have. I think we've done a better job at creating more startup businesses, for sure, but I think it would be hard pressed to say that we were a digital powerhouse. And I think we need urgently to have a view of what we're trying to build in this country, and how we're trying to equip our people to be able to take advantage of what the next decade is going to throw at us. So I feel as though there's still a huge job to be done, and the OU can be a bit of that, but it needs much more joined up leadership across the public and private sector.
I think you're so right, Martha. I mean, I was actually reading a confirmation of the number I'm sure you know well. I mean, our listeners may know or not. There's 2.9 billion people on the planet who still don't have any access to the internet. 2.9 billion. Just access. Okay, access. And actually, those people are not just in the fast-growing, emerging countries, economies in Africa. There are millions in the UK. There are millions in France. There are millions in the US. And I think we got to start with that.
Yes.
And obviously bridging the I would say the worlds of digital and skilling together to make sure people have enough contextual understanding of the tools they're going to use in all kinds of jobs, from hospitality to retail to manufacturing to whatever. It's part of the job's design now.
And
of the
also,
society.
Sorry to interrupt you, but in a world where we know that, when I started my working life in the early 90s, I think it was that you were projected to have 11 different jobs through your lifetime, 11. And now I think, you probably know this number, but I think it's more like 40 now for young people. And so you are going to be looking for work in different ways. Work is completely decentralized, all those things that have been well talked about. But there's just a very simple thing that underpins that. 90% of jobs are advertised online. Right? Or only advertised online.
Yes.
So if you don't understand technology, you're not going to be able to get those jobs. And it's just something that I constantly refer to. It's such a trap for people who are maybe currently on benefits and unemployed. If you don't have the access, you're never going to get the access to find the work to give you access. I mean, it's just a horrible cycle that you get into.
Fantastic. Let's move on and discuss a little bit another persona in Martha, one of your lives. There are many lives, Martha. You entered the House of Lords in 2013 as a crossbench peer, and you are director of Peers to the Planet as well, which seeks to climate change and biodiversity loss at the top of the political agenda. How does that fit in with your core mission and principles, and how are you able to use that platform in the political landscape to bring about real positive change?
The House of Lords is a strange kind of beast. It's an unelected chamber that you come to in many different ways, political appointees or independent appointees like me. I applied to be there, so you fill in an application form, you have an interview, a bit like getting a normal job. And the reason I thought it would be a good place to try and lend my voice is because every bit of government legislation gets scrutinised by the House of Lords, and the government can reject anything they want from it, but occasionally they listen to it, more than occasionally. And it's a good way of keeping checks and balances on the government, raising questions with the government. And I felt as though I had gathered all this knowledge about the kind of digital world, digital policy, especially in the UK. And I wanted to have somewhere that I could channel it. And so I decided that I would apply and try and at least lend a bit more of a technology baseline to some of the discussions in
Yeah.
Parliament. And when I arrived in 2014, it was, most people looked at me and kept asking me whether the Wi-Fi was working. That was technology, to be honest.
Can you help us, Mark?
Yeah, exactly. Like, my BlackBerry isn't connecting to the Wi-Fi. Oh, God. But now it's a very, very different place.
Yeah.
There's many more young peers and many more people that have come, of course, because the shifting nature of the world we're living in, come from backgrounds with more technology in them, and amazing work goes on around tech. So it's changed a lot already, but there's still some way to go. But I think the main thing, just on a personal level, was it's a place to contribute with policy ideas, challenges to the government, and expertise and understanding. And I wanted to try and use some of the things that I had learned through my journey as digital champion.
And is there a policy that you've been incredibly passionate about, and where you think your voice has been heard, among others, obviously, and where you feel great about the time you spend in the House of Lords?
It's a good question, because it's a difficult place to feel great about, because many things don't function very well there, and sometimes governments, most recently, have been quite have had disregard for some of the things that have come from the Lords, and all of that can make it a tough environment. But I think the work I've enjoyed personally most is committee work, and that can be powerful. I sat on the National Security Committee. It's a joint committee with MPs and in the Commons, and we did a lot of interesting work around threats to the UK, and I know that my voice around technology just did spark sometimes different conversations, and I really enjoyed that and hope it contributed to marginally better work. And similarly, as I say, I chaired this committee around the long-term implications of COVID. It was difficult because it was still COVID when we were doing it, and it was hard to see far ahead. But some of the things we learnt, and some of the importance of whether it's resilience in local communities, how we make sure councils are prepared for the next pandemic, through to some of the technology things we discovered, and some of the ways that we can unlock more of that resilience, were very powerful. And so I'm proud mostly of the committee work.
Yeah. So now opening one very last chapters among many others. Again, we have not necessarily explored. We take a couple of different podcast episodes, maybe part 1, 2, and 3.
I think you'd lose all your listeners, so we won't worry about that.
No worries. I think they get more excited as they listen to you, Martha. No, what I'd like to talk about is more the time you spend, you dedicate yourself to many charities, including Ability Net, Reprieve, CamFed, and Just for Kids Law. And a question I have for you, because there are many causes, obviously, there's so many causes you could get excited about and want to support. How do you go personally about rallying and engaging so different people and stakeholders to build a change to address such critical issues? Because what I've learned myself, being involved in some also such charities, my own foundation and others as well, the biggest challenge in many ways is how do you align both yourself, what's inside of you, your personal mission, with the mission you want to be part of, and how do you bring together a lot of voices, very different people, very different parties, very different stakeholders, to build a change together and to address the big challenge we see in society, in the world. So I'm sure you've been building a lot of skills doing that. So tell us the way you build a momentum, that change and that force to have an impact that you feel great about.
Well, I think, you cite some charities I'm really lucky to have worked with there, but the thing that defines all of them is great leadership. And I think that's where I personally feel inspired. I have a bunch of things that I care about and I'm interested in. It's a huge long list, and it changes, and a curious person, then everything has some interest, doesn't it? But I think the thing that defines why I've worked more closely with some organisations than others are the amazing social entrepreneurs or charity leaders that are doing often things in extremely tough circumstances, and often in areas of the world that's not, it's not sort of, in quotation marks, glamorous. It's not big cancer glamorous fundraisers. I'm not being glib. I know those causes are very important, but some attract more than others, right? And I've always been attracted myself personally to areas which are a little bit more gritty, perhaps, and certainly less, perhaps, headline grabbing and so on. And I feel very lucky to have always had, I don't know where it comes from, it's just always been in me. I've always been particularly interested in criminal justice, and struck me that we've never quite got that right as society, without sounding arrogant. And I think that a lot of my friends work in this area, and my best friend is an extraordinary human rights lawyer, and I became involved with this amazing charity, Reprieve, which helps people who face the death penalty around the world. Had some amazing experiences with this organisation. So the thing that for me often is the definition of why I get involved is because of great leadership. And to your point about how do you create the change, well, it's not for me to create the change. It's those great leaders. You want to help empower them as much as you can, and sometimes that's resources. Sometimes that can be actual funding, of course, but more often than not, in my experience,
coaching,
helping them make connections. It can be that you might think, well, what's the similarity between a charity looking at disability technology and a charity helping kids who are stuck in police stations? But the truth is, they're both small charities trying to raise money, facing difficult circumstances, and often many points of connection. So I like bringing people together. I love mentoring and talking to people, and just being a safe space for somebody to say, I just can't do it today. So I think that's what I enjoy.
No, wonderful. Hey, what piece of advice would you give our listeners who want to bring about positive change? And just to add to that question, we just discussed before the fact that the Gen Zs, are going to probably have 40 jobs or 40 experiences in their work life, right? And in connection to that, I had a great discussion with my friend and manager, Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, in my podcast early on, actually, about a year ago now. And I think he gave our listeners a very good piece of advice. He said, don't wait for your next job to have a positive impact and to make it happen. It's not about your career plan. It's about what you do today. So what would be your advice today for people listening to us, Martha? They are from all horizons, actually, all kind of people listening to the podcast, to bring about that positive change.
Well, Satya Nadella is clearly the boss of an amazing corporation for a reason, He's got some smarts, and I can follow in his coattails. I often talk about everyone being an entrepreneur, and people look at me sometimes like, what are you talking about? I work in a customer service center. I can't be an entrepreneur. And I just think that it's a mindset shift, actually. Shift. It's about, and I know I'm not being kind of flighty about hard work with difficult bosses in hard situations. I'm lucky. I've never worked on a factory line. I've never done that kind of role, but I would contest that for a lot of people, just being able to slightly free yourself from thinking of yourself just as the employee to thinking of yourself as an entrepreneur. If you see a problem, think about how you can fix it. Tell your boss, tell someone around you, tell someone you work with, and have that curiosity that I think defines entrepreneurs, because I always think that will stand you in good stead. And don't be shy to kind of poke your nose in somewhere, right? You can build the relationship so that you can think about things just outside maybe the box that you are being put in. So I think about that. I often talk about everyone being an entrepreneur and thinking like an entrepreneur, and that comes down to me to asking questions, thinking about building networks, thinking about how to get stuff done that maybe isn't just falling in the day job. And that can be immensely rewarding, I think, and make you feel a bit more empowered at what you're doing.
Wonderful. So be an entrepreneur of your life every day.
Exactly.
One day at a time, So very last question, Martha. I'm afraid this is the last one, because again, as I said, it could be a much longer discussion for sure. Looking forward, what's next on your agenda, and what does success look like for you? Success.
Well, I mean, I know we started this conversation with me saying that I get more and more imposter syndrome, and I mean it actually quite sincerely. I feel like the more you're lucky to have exposure to amazing things, whether it's what we've been going through at Twitter, or whether I've just become president here of the British Chambers of Commerce, an incredible organisation representing the voice of small business. And I keep thinking, how can I do anything with these amazing organizations? They know way more than me. They're actually running businesses. So I think for me, success, you define it in different terms at different moments in your life. And where I'm at right now, I'm so lucky I have a kind of bedrock of resources and a platform, and I don't feel that kind of hectic need to what next. I feel as though I'm very lucky to be able to pick things that are meaningful to me. The things that I still care about deeply are around the issues that we've talked about so far. Underpinning the world with a good way of digitizing is very important. I still think we need voices reminding us that technology we control, it doesn't control us. And within that, I would say this, but we haven't talked so much about gender, but pretty much in every world I've ever operated, whether it's startup world, technology, in Parliament, women are in the minority. And I think it's beholden on women like me to keep making those arguments.
Yeah.
It's tricky because you don't want to become the white noise. I don't want to just be that person always talking about women's issues, but they're still so important for all of us to understand and unlock. So I think success for me is, I don't have some big master plan. I just want to do a good job at the things I choose to do, and I try and pull the threads between them. And I personally believe that unless people like me who've had this luck are focused on some of the big challenges, then you're not doing a good job. So that will be, sometimes people want to talk about climate, or it might be gender equality, but trying to keep aware of the biggest issues that we're facing and not lose sight of the power that you might have, even if it feels small, to in some way keep the conversation moving or help organizations. That's what I aspire to do.
Well, thank you so much, Baroness Martha Lane Fox. Martha, it was a wonderful discussion, and sharing your Zeitgeist and your North Star and all the learnings and the greatness coming from your scars in your life.
Yes, my scars are quite considerable, I tell you that.
But I've been wonderful, really, and I'm sure that our listeners have been not just inspired, but certainly encouraged to take action in their lives day after day. So thank you so much again for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.